Welcome back to the M&M Discipleship Podcast, where we discuss what it means to be a disciple of Christ. We aim to look for God in our daily lives, be in His Word, and strive to live out the teachings of Jesus. This is Dakota Moody, and I'm joined by my co-host, Michael Round. Michael, how are you doing today?
Oh, great, man. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. I got to spend the weekend in Central Tennessee with a very good friend of mine, of whom I co-host a podcast, and so we had a very good time up there.
And yeah, it was a really good time. And I hated that I was sick or not feeling well for a lot of that. And it's nice to have my voice back. Certainly, that was a little fun there. Dakota had to do some speaking for me. He was basically there with me, and I would whisper something, and we were out in public, and he'd have to translate for me.
That's right. Yeah, there's a little bit of my wife is not necessarily the most I've had to say outspoken person, or is that outspoken? The term, I always get that mixed up. So I guess she is usually not that loud, and I'm usually used to kind of talking for her a lot of times, and so it was not necessarily all that unfamiliar to me to have to be somebody's voice box for a little bit, but didn't expect it with you though. So.
Yeah, no, it is strange, and I realized how much I talk, how frequently I talk. Well, and it's like I think I need to be quiet more often. So that's I think the lesson I learned is like I rely on my voice too much.
Yeah, there's some I think some very good spiritual ideas to that. I've there's a few books that I've read, whether it was Richard Foster's Celebration of Discipline or others that have talked about how we so often can talk too much, or we can be too reliant on that, and almost as though we're being wasteful with our words. And I do think it certainly affects the way people can perceive us if we use our words incorrectly. And some people, and I know this from personal experience, can sometimes talk a little bit too much, reveal a little bit too much information. Now, I don't think I'd ever accuse you of that. That's more my problem than your problem. But yeah.
Well, I think it's Proverbs that talks about how you'll know a fool by as many words.
This is very true.
But yeah, I think where I can struggle with that definitely is just inserting myself in places I don't need to be inserted. Just kind of I should have just stayed on the sidelines on that one. So yeah. No, that's definitely a difficult thing. But anyways, lose your voice, and next time you'll see. Next time you lose your voice, you'll see how much you rely on talking, or maybe how little. I don't know. You might find the other lesson.
Yeah, that is somebody out there. I know that I talk too much. That's always been my issue. So because I've lost my voice on a couple occasions, and once in college, I did a 24 hours of silence. Some of the hardest times of my life. It's difficult. I live a very charmed life, and that was it. But it was really difficult for me not to talk for 24 hours.
Yeah. No, I've talked to people that have done things like that, and then you don't realize how difficult it is. And also, like solitary confinement. That's one of the worst punishments we can give people is put them in a room by themselves. Absolutely. And I mean, there's an element of silence with that. There's just no noise other than what you make.
Absolutely. God has created a very full, abounding, nature. Creation has created us as people who need each other, are dependent upon each other, and the need for others. And so taking us away from the fullness of God's creation, taking us away from the time with each other, it can have a lot of very detrimental effects in that way. There's no doubt. And so we can see what God's intention was when He created mankind. And speaking of God's creation, Michael, where have you seen God this week in your life?
Yeah, no, what I have been noticing is, and maybe it's just because there are more of them, or maybe I've shown an interest in it, and so I get more of it on my feed. But it seems like more and more athletes are outspoken in their faith. And one in particular who's rising to prominence, I mean, someone who was on the national stage, but I thought that he wouldn't stay there very long, is CJ Stroud.
Having quite a year.
Yeah. I'll freely admit I did not think he was going to make a great pro, but he is, and he's done a great job with the Texans. And I hope he continues with that. I mean, he said this relatively recently. He said, Jesus laid his life on the cross for us. I really believe that. this is bigger than just football. Football is my platform. Spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ is my purpose.
Mm.
And so I'm floored by that. And so, I'm rooting for him. If for no other reason that his platform continues to be big, that he can try and share the message of Jesus Christ to more people. I know at times when Tim Tebow would have eye black and it would have scriptures on it, those scriptures were some of the most Googled verses that week. And so it's a good opportunity. And so seeing players like CJ and others do well is great, but it's more important that they're spreading that kind of purpose. And I see God working in people's lives like that.
Absolutely. That is quite a showing of his character in that way. And,
For sure.
I think it'll only just fill Carolina Panthers fans with more and more regrets about not taking CJ Stroud #1 overall. But yeah, that's fantastic to see that.
I will say, I saw an
Mhm.
interesting graphic that showed a whole bunch of either #1 overall quarterbacks or just first round quarterbacks in general. And many of them had a very similar stat line to Bryce Young. So like Andrew Luck, Matthew Stafford, Justin Herbert, a lot of really good ones.
Probably
So they
Trevor
had
Lawrence as well also struggled
yeah,
initially.
yes, yeah. Trevor Lawrence was on that list as well. There was like 5 or 6 of them. So not to say that he will be the next version of any of those players, but he might be better than he's looking so far.
Yes. The only issue is he's about 6 inches shorter than any of those guys. But yeah.
Well,
But
that might
anyway,
not work in his favor.
yeah, exactly. But on that, that's just great from CJ Stroud. I think there's also a lesson to that for us Southern Christians. At CJ Stroud is from California, played his college ball in Ohio, and yet he's got that kind of conviction in Christ. It's not just us who care about God here in the South. I know we're in the Bible Belt, but there's plenty of people throughout this country and throughout this world who also seek after God first. So
Good
something
call.
for us to
Good
keep
point.
in mind. Absolutely.
So what about you, man?
So I know it's going to sound like I'm beating a little bit of a dead horse because we've talked about this multiple times, but I was driving back. We drove the northern route to get to you guys. That was from my parents' house in Western North Carolina through Knoxville to you guys there in Central
They
Tennessee.
made sure to stop at Buc-ee's.
We made sure to stop at Buc-ee's, absolutely, because you can't not stop at Buc-ee's. Did that on the way there. But on the way back, it was a completely new drive for us. We've never drove that route back. We did the southern route through Chattanooga, then up through what is the worst traffic place in America, which is Atlanta, ever. And this is somebody I have driven in Houston and Dallas and many very terrible places. There's not a worse place than Atlanta.
Well, I've heard LA is pretty bad, and I have to say that's possible. That may be worse.
Maybe, sure, but I have zero intention of probably driving
in the Eastern United States.
Yes, in the Eastern United States, it is horrible. I mean, you think there's places that have much larger populations that have much better traffic than Atlanta. It's truly terrible. I cannot express to you how bad the traffic is there in Atlanta if you've never driven through it. And if you haven't, good for you. But before we got there, that route from where you guys are at there in McMinnville to Chattanooga was fantastically beautiful. It really was. And I guess there's not that much wind in that portion of the country because most of the leaves were still on the trees. And it was just shades of all kinds of orangey reds. And you could see just the topography was just fantastic there in that area. Just going up and down those mountains there. And there was 2 very severe mountains going there to Chattanooga.
You go up and then you go down.
Down, yes. And when you say down, it's down. I mean, it's one of those downs where if you guys are familiar with this, they've got the runaway truck ramps, because it's like that much of a down.
Yep.
But you're talking about gorgeous. It is a gorgeous drive. And it's just one of those things again where, it can be very easy to just get lost in the scene and not think about God shaping that with his hands, not that can get lost very easily. But when you talk about where I'm seeing God, that's where you got it. You have to see him in the design of everything, in the design of those mountains, and the design of those leaves to make those kind of vibrant colors and to look the way they do. And for all of that to be put together in a scene in God's creation, and seeing that is it's something that touches the heart for me in a place like that. And I've always been a mountain person in the first place, so seeing that kind of landscape and scenery was fantastic. And since it was a new experience, it hit even harder than it normally would.
Oh yeah, and it's a good time of year to be up there. Yeah, and like a month ago, it was spectacular. But yeah, still lingering, and yeah, that is certainly a beautiful drive. So yeah,
Middle of
I
nowhere. Make sure you got plenty of gas if you drive that
yes,
route. And
I warned you.
yeah. Make sure you have plenty of gas. We did have plenty of gas, but just make sure if you ever make that drive, anybody
Yeah,
out there, that you got plenty of gas and that you got some emergency way to contact help. Because if you need something, good luck. Because there ain't no cell
yeah.
phone signal through there. But very beautiful.
For those that are local, they went over the mountain out Highway 8, so it's beautiful out there, as you guys who are local know. It's one of my favorite drives since we've been here as well.
Absolutely.
So, well, today we're working through our Sermon on the Mount. It's not our Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount,
That's
our
right.
study of the Sermon on the Mount. There you go. And we're to the point in Matthew 5, verse 33, where Jesus said, "Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it's the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil." Dakota, when you listen to that passage, what kind of thoughts come to your mind about Jesus' teaching on oaths?
Well, there's been some people that have interpreted this passage as though you can't make any kind of secular oath. You shouldn't have any sort of pledge or take an oath, be under oath in that way because of this passage. But that's really missing the point of what Jesus is trying to say here. The biggest thing he's trying to say is follow through with what you're going to do. Be a person of your word. If you're going to say you're going to do something, do that thing, or don't. Either
Yeah,
or say that you won't do it and then don't do it. Be a person of your word. It's simple as that. And don't look to make these convoluted commitments when you could very simply just say yes or no and follow through with that. Because as people see us as Christians, we're supposed to be the hands and the feet of Jesus. If they cannot rely on the people of God, they will not feel like they can rely on God. And so we have to be that example to say, we are people of our word because of our God.
yeah, that's a really good point. And he starts out by saying, "You shall not swear falsely." And so he encourages them not to swear at all because you don't risk making a false oath. But like a lot of things, like swearing in court, I mean, you're saying you're committing to telling the truth.
Right.
Well, that is something you should do anyway. But so to do that, to swear in, so to speak, I mean that's not outside of your character. I mean, you're saying I'm going to tell the truth is what you're swearing to do, and that's what you should be doing anyway.
And we
But
should
one
be
thing I
the
was saying,
kind of people, sorry, I was
yes,
just saying, we should
yeah,
be the kind of people where we don't have to make an oath, right?
yes,
When we don't have to, because it's one of those things where usually if you're dealing with a kind of an untrustworthy person, you have to ask them like 3 times. Now you're going to do that thing,
right,
right? You're going to do this. Like, for example, if somebody is chronically late to something and you say, I need you to show up on time to this thing, and then you have to say it 3 or 4 times, it's because it is within their character to not be on time. And so
yeah,
you continuously have to say that to be like, you will be on time this time. Yes, because it was their character to not be. Well, in the same kind of way, if you have to say, you will tell the truth this time, right? That means that this is not somebody you can take at their word. And so you
mm,
should be the kind of person to where somebody shouldn't even have to ask to take an oath.
yeah. No, that's a
Yeah.
really good point. Just
Yeah.
be yes or no people. What we say, we follow through with. And if there's some reason we're not able to follow through, I think it's important that we circle back with people and say, I'm sorry, I wasn't able to do this, and not necessarily give an excuse. I can't remember who it was. It might have been, I think it's Benjamin Franklin, but he said, "Never ruin an apology with an excuse."
Mm.
And sometimes when we say we couldn't do this or that, we ruin it. We should just say, "I'm sorry that I did not follow through with this."
I messed
But
up.
the part of the point he's talking about is that people would swear by different things, and the swears would have different levels of meaning or levels of value. And there were certain things that they could swear by that would basically mean that they were like crossing their fingers behind their back and it meant nothing. And they were dishonest in their business dealings, dishonest in their dealings in general. And Jesus is saying, get rid of that. Don't have any part of that. Don't swear by, heaven or by God, the throne of God, or by earth or your head or anything. That shouldn't be a part of who you are.
Exactly. Again, to the point of people should be able to take you at your word. If you're
Yeah.
having to swear onto something like that, that usually means that somebody feels like your word is not good enough. So they're wanting you to swear on something that is above and beyond yourself because they cannot trust you and who you are as a person. And we as Christians cannot be untrustworthy, unreliable people, because if people cannot trust us in what we do in our daily lives, how can they trust us whenever we tell them that Jesus is Lord?
Yep, exactly. Exactly. Well, it's a good passage to think about and really something good for us to think about. I think trustworthiness is a very underrated quality that Christians should more properly rate and value.
That's right.
So, Dakota, we have our last segment. What is it that you've been reading lately?
Well, again, me and you have been reading through this the same book as we have been going through our study as in our little ministers meeting that we have, and it is the 7 habits of highly effective people. My version of the 20,000 versions of this book, but this is the same material that we are reading together here at the beginning of chapter 2, and the theme of this chapter is beginning with the end in mind. When you start things, you should have the idea for where you're going to finish in mind. And he begins this chapter with this really powerful image, this illustration to really make us think deeply. And he talks about you going to a funeral. And you're going to go to this funeral and you walk down the aisle and you look into the casket, and who is there in that casket but yourself? See your own face. And as you sit down, you see the speaker list, and it's the people who are in your life, family, friends, coworkers, people in your life. What are the things that you want them to say? And this is the passage that I'll read here, starting in page 111 in my book. Now think deeply. What would you like each of these speakers to say about you in your life? What kind of husband, wife, father, or mother would you like their words to reflect? What kind of son or daughter or cousin? What kind of friend? What kind of working associate? What character would you like them to have seen in you? What contributions, achievements would you want them to remember? Look carefully at the people around you. What difference would you like to have made in their lives? The idea, of course, is as we're living, we need to have this idea, because what we do now will be what happens later. If we carry on with a life that we maybe are living now that does not fit this end goal of what we want our funerals to look like, what the people to be saying about us, thinking about us, or be affected by what we do, then we have to make some sort of change now to change the end.
Absolutely. Well, and interesting with that, like I've heard it said before. I cannot remember the name of the individual who recommended this, but he recommended that every person should at least attend one wedding and one funeral a year to realize the beauty of life and the joy of life, but then also the reality of life and how brief it is. And it's a sobering thought to think of our own funeral and to take each day with that in mind. And really, so that's part of what I want to talk about. He then goes into toward the end of the chapter about all the different things that people could center their life on and how those are things that are not worth centering your life on. And one of the ones that opened my eyes, I was very curious to see what he said on that, was church-centeredness. And it really seems like Stephen R. Covey is a Christian man. I get the feeling that he is, or he was. But he said that church-centeredness is one of the things that you shouldn't have your life built on. And I want you to read or hear this with me. I believe that almost anyone who is seriously involved in any church will recognize that church going is not synonymous with personal spirituality. There are some people who get so busy in church worship and projects that they become insensitive to the pressing human needs that surround them, contradicting the very precepts they profess to believe deeply. That's just eye-opening to me. As a minister, I get that. I think about one of the times that I was the driest spiritually was when I was in college studying my Bible. In the midst of those Bible classes, I got to the point that I just didn't want to pick up my Bible. I didn't want to even think about that anymore. I was so saturated with it. And sometimes we can be so saturated with things related to the church that we forget about our relationship with God. We forget about our relationship with His church. So sometimes we can get caught in going through the motions, so to speak. I know that's something that's popular to talk about these days. But it's important that we don't contradict the very precepts we profess to believe. So be mindful of that. Even if you're heavily involved at church, which I think you should be, don't make that into something it shouldn't be. What thoughts do you have on that?
Well, I think this is a really important thought for us in the modern day, because two things I want to think about with this. Number one is, I earlier I made that comment about us in the South who believe, we're the only Christians in this world or something like that. How many people go to church every Sunday, but it is just checking boxes. It is just going through the motions. They are doing the things that they feel are required of them, but there is no depth of spirituality there. And they may be church-centered people. They could be even people who are working and volunteering in a church, doing a lot in a church. By the way, this is not a danger that is just exclusive to people going to church. This is a big danger for ministers. There's a lot of ministers, as Michael was kind of talking about there, who he experienced school. There's a lot of ministers experience this in their professional lives, where they are, their entire career is revolving around doing things for the kingdom of God, and yet it can be very dry to them because it can just become work. It can just become monotonous work. And so where are we spiritually, not just in a working sense, and how much can that really affect our experience at church and our religious experience in general, number one. And the number two thing is, the thing that we need to be very acutely aware of in modern America is there's a growing movement of people who are spiritual, but not religious. And the reason why they have separated themselves from church is kind of because of this, is what you've just talked about, right? This church-centeredness, because for a lot of times they have seen, maybe they've even experienced it, going to church as an act, but it has not filled their cup spiritually, because it is nothing but dry routine. It is nothing but bare work, where it is not something that is filling spiritually. It is not a spiritual focus. It is just going to church, because that's what we've always done, and that's what we should do. And this is something that's very important, I think, for us in the modern day. We need to keep this in mind, because where are we at spiritually? Because I don't think you can completely disconnect spirituality from religion, because then you start getting into some very alternative ideas that can go south very quickly.
Oh, yeah.
But a lot of people have been detaching spirituality from religion, but a lot of times we have done this as well, but we have instead stayed in the religious camp instead of the spiritual camp, where we've just been religion without spirituality, where many people want spirituality without religion. We need to make sure to be aware of that in our own lives. Is our spirituality alive and well in our religion, or are we just following some dead principles to us?
Yeah, exactly. And making sure we understand the difference. And so for us as churchgoers, we need to recognize that we are there to worship God, and like we're there for Him. And it isn't just about observing and entertaining service, or just being there to check off a box. It's about worship to God. It's about encouragement to others and helping others. And so the Bible is very, very clear. The New Testament church, they were not, spiritual lone rangers. They were involved in the church, no matter how small it might have been. And so we also need to be involved in each other's lives and be committed to the church. But we just got to make sure when we're there, and that we as leaders especially make sure that the focus is on God and what he's doing, and focus on worshiping him and encouraging one another through fellowship. That it's not empty, it's meaningful.
Absolutely, brother. Absolutely.
So anything else to kind of, I do have to kind of alert you to something exciting. I got a call. I missed a call. It's from Chico, California. Aaron Rodgers finally decided to call me after all these years.
After all these years. Is he
all these years
apologizing
of
to you now for
fanhood.
leaving? Yeah, I'm about to say, is he leaving? Is he apologizing for leaving the Packers?
I don't know. Maybe he's just explaining himself, you know.
He's telling
I
you
gotta make
how
sure
well
and
he's
call him
recovering.
back.
Yeah, that's right. He's telling you how well he's recovering from his Achilles injury is what he's doing.
Yeah. Crazy stuff. Anyways, I thought you'd find that funny. Well, we appreciate you guys joining us today for the M&M Discipleship Podcast. Until next time, let's look for God, learn from his word, and live out his teachings. Thank you for joining us.